Hello, friends. I decided that I wanted to take a little bit more time and talk about lupus. Lupus is a huge part of my life and something that I now consider to be my superpower. A lot of people don't know anything about lupus, and I know personally I didn't know anything about it prior to my diagnosis. I had honestly never even heard of lupus, so it just sounded almost like witchcraft to me. Um, but of course, over time, I've learned so much, and I know I share a lot about my flares and trials and tribulations regarding lupus, but there's a lot more to it than just what you see on my page. So I finally decided to take a little time and share more about what it is and my journey, diagnosis, all of the things. Of course, that's a long-term process, but you got to start somewhere. So on a very rudimentary level, lupus is a chronic illness where the body starts to attack its own tissues and organs. So basically, your body is attacking itself, which is kind of insane, but definitely a thing, and is exactly what happened to me. And lupus is something that you don't look sick. I mean, if you look at me right now, obviously you see my scar. Here she is, and I love her. But I never really looked sick in the beginning. And most people don't. It's the invisible chronic disease, which is kind of infuriating on so many levels. But it is also a disease where they don't know what causes it. A lot of people believe that it's genetic, but I've done genetic testing and it came back with no proper results for me. So I kind of ruled that out. But I know that environmental stressors can be a really big issue. Growing up, I put a lot of stress on my body. I am a former ballet dancer, which I think you guys know about me, and I, after having knee surgery, developed a very bad eating disorder. First, it was anorexia, followed by bulimia, and I had that for well over a decade. And so I think that the abuse I put on my body definitely did not help the situation. They also think that traumatic life events have something to do with the onset of lupus. And for me, I do think that, we all have traumatic life events, but I definitely had a couple. I just, particularly in the summer of 2008, my father had quadruple bypass heart surgery on August 14th while I was living in Santa Barbara, California. And on August 15th, my best friend that I was living with, roommate, college bestie, all of it, committed suicide. So it was just like kind of a very heavy time in my life, and I wasn't necessarily sure how to navigate it. And so my eating disorder got worse. I picked up a very bad drinking problem as well, which I don't really talk about much, but I guess I don't talk about my eating disorder much either. But those are a couple of things that I think eventually contributed to the onset of my lupus. I very much accept that. I'm not like, oh, why me? Like, how did it happen? It's like, no, you very clearly put your body through a ton of stress. And I actually, most days, just feel very lucky to be alive. So that gives you a little bit of context on the backstory for me. But lupus comes in various levels of severity. It's 1 through 6, 1 being the least severe, 6 being the most severe. I fall right in the middle, around 3/4. So I'm actually very grateful for that, because a lot of my fellow warriors I hear their stories, I see their symptoms, and I feel so blessed that I can still live the life that I live and not be so plagued down by this illness. It's chronic, so it's lifelong. There is no cure, which is very disappointing. But over time, it really can be managed. I mean, you need to take your medications as prescribed. You need to see your doctor regularly, and there does come a point where it can go into remission. I kind of explain it sometimes that it's a lot like cancer. They sometimes treat it with chemo, which is kind of crazy, and it can go into remission. So there's always light at the end of the tunnel. You just kind of have to stay the course, do the right things. It's not always easy. It can get very frustrating, but it's obviously a battle worth fighting, and one that I've been fighting since June of 2016. I was actually diagnosed on my birthday, my 31st birthday. I am 38, spoiler alert, and turning 39 this year. I don't really tell you guys how old I am ever, but there we go. So, yeah, it was the shock of my life, and just the months leading up to it that year were pretty insane. I just remember going to Mexico and coming back with my first sunburn. I don't really sunburn ever, so I was a little bit surprised. Of course, now I'm like full on sunscreen and the whole bit, but at the time I was like, oh, brown people don't sunburn, but we sure can. And came back with the sunburn, but just kind of ignored it. I went surfing that year in San Francisco, of all places, the coldest water ever, and I had my first experience with Raynaud's, and I just thought it was because the water was so cold, but no, it was definitely my lupus starting to rear its ugly head. And after that, I was just living my life, very busy, commuting back and forth to the city for work. I worked at a finance job, hedge fund and operations. And over time, I realized I wasn't really able to keep up with the schedule the way in which I initially was able to. I was also at the time preparing for yoga competition, the good old national competition in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I will never forget it. So I was in the hot yoga studio every day, 90 minutes after work, and my body stopped sweating in the hot room. Mind you, it's 105 degrees with 40% humidity, and I stopped sweating. I was like, oh no, something is definitely wrong. But I kept going. I didn't see a doctor, and eventually I started to swell. My edema was kicking in, and at the time I didn't really understand what it was. I just thought that I had chipmunk cheeks from the flu or something like that, because I did have a bit of a cough and a slight fever, and my colleagues were like, you just need to go home, like you don't look good, this is not the Victoria that we know. So I went home. I didn't practice for a little bit, and then I just took some time off to rest and recover, but I was actually sleeping about 20 hours a day and functioning for 4, which is very much not conducive for anything. But I finally decided that, you know, I was able to go back to work, go back to the studio, and so I did all of those things, and I was fine for a while, and then everything kind of kicked back in again. And so I started to get concerned when I noticed that my hair was falling out in clumps, like literal clumps, and I was starting to get bald spots for the first time, and I was mortified. My hair was thinning in every place possible, and I honestly had no idea what to do. Hair, it is and it isn't, but it is kind of important to some people, and now not as much. And I kind of love my short afro thing going on here, but at the time it was very concerning and just kind of embarrassing. Didn't really know what to do about it. And then my fever came back, my cheeks came back, my whole body was starting to swell. I was still trying to practice yoga so I could be ready for this competition, but I started to get sores in my mouth, started to get blood blisters on my fingers, and I had no idea what the hell was going on. I finally went to see a doctor, but I went to urgent care, which was basically a waste of time. They told me I had the flu. So I went back home and I did the rest things and the antibiotic things, and nothing improved. And it was just the same cycle over and over again. And I hadn't learned anything from my first urgent care visit because I kept going back to urgent care and nothing was happening for me. Instead, I was just resting. My mouth ulcers were getting worse. My fingers were getting worse. The hair's still falling out. I'm swelling. I'm getting the worst migraines of my life. I had no idea that I could even get a migraine because it wasn't something that I had ever experienced prior to the onset of these symptoms. So I eventually dragged myself back to work again, and I was practicing yoga on the weekends for this competition because I'm stubborn, and instead of listening to my body, I forced it to perform. I got on the plane to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, very foolishly when I look back at it now. Insane fever of 105. My mouth is on fire. I can't eat anything. My fingers and hands are barely functional. I am just like praying that I can survive this. And I remember I'm like warming up backstage, I'm like, all right, I think I can do it. I get on stage, and basically as soon as the lights are shining on me, I can't see anything. Everything sort of fades to black. With lupus, you can have problems with sensitivity to light, which I hadn't experienced yet, and this was the first time I'm experiencing it. So I'm on the stage and I basically collapse. And then I tried to compete the second day because somehow I managed to qualify for the second day. And it was the same thing all over again. I got on the next flight back home because I was just broken, devastated, and sick beyond belief. I didn't go back into the yoga studio after that. I didn't even know if I had practiced yoga again because it was so traumatizing. And I went to the office, gave it one more shot. I sat down at my computer and my head was pounding. Migraine was insane. And I just remember, or my father tells me at least, that he called me one day at the office. And I believe this was all on the same day. And he's like, hi, Toria, like just checking in. How are you doing? We had a daily morning phone call and I didn't have any idea it was his voice on the phone. I acted like, I'm like, oh, who am I speaking with? And he's like, it's your father. And I didn't even reply. I said nothing. So he knew stuff was getting serious and he couldn't figure it out. So I ended up going home that day, barely. I left the office because he advised me to go home. And I told my colleague, I was like, I can't work today. I was like, you have to finish this. So I left and I walked outside. And it was summer, so the light was so strong, so bright. I basically blacked out. They call it brain fog. I had no idea what was going on or where I was or what was happening. It was the grace of God that got me to the train that day. And for some unknown reason, I wasn't able to read anything, but I was able to recognize colors. So I knew that I had to get on the blue line subconsciously. So I made my way to the blue line, got on the train, passed out, and the conductor had to wake me up at my stop. And he thankfully was the last stop to get off the train. And then I got in a car after circling the parking garage for an hour because I couldn't remember where I parked. And I park in the same spot every single day, mind you. Got in the car, drove home, which was the stupidest thing I could have done, but I did. I barely got there. Got in bed and never got out. Probably a week later, I ended up seeing another urgent care doctor. Yeah, believe it or not. And finally, someone with some sense got my labs back. She's like, something is wrong. You need to see a real doctor. And I was like, okay. Did I see a real doctor right away? No. Instead, my parents begged me to come home. And I was like, I don't know if I can get home. They're like, you have to try, sweetie. So I'm like, all right. So I got on the train from Huntington to Penn Station, managed to get from Penn Station to Princeton Junction. My parents are in Princeton. And when I got off the train, I couldn't walk, couldn't recognize my father. I just stood on the platform blankly, and he was like, oh my God, something is wrong. So he came and he scooped me up, and I went home and managed to get my faculties back, and was kind of giving him the rundown. And so he got me an appointment the next day with my primary care physician, who took my labs, and he's like, oh no, she needs to see a rheumatologist. Like, I can't help her with this, but there is something wrong. And so finally, after seeing a rheumatologist, she diagnosed me with lupus. And of course, my first words to her are, is my hair going to keep falling out? Because why? I mean, why would I ask that? It wasn't, am I going to live? Am I going to die? It was, is my hair going to keep falling out? And she was honest. She was like, yeah, most likely it's going to for now. I was like, great. So I finally got a little crash course in lupus in her office, and just took the summer off. I didn't have a choice. I took a medical leave from life, a medical leave from work, and I spent that summer at home with my family, recovering, recuperating, getting my health back, getting my faculties back, getting my motor skills back. I couldn't believe I was barely able to walk. I was frail as ever at that point, and that's kind of insane with lupus. It's like one day I can be the size of a house, and then a week later I'm like the size of a skeleton because I'm so sick. So it was a journey unlike any other. I started to exhibit symptoms that January, and by June, so basically 5.5, 6 months later, I had a diagnosis. And I know for some people it can be years before they get a diagnosis, and I might have been exhibiting symptoms prior to the onset of my insane symptoms, but it wasn't anything to where I had to stop living, or it was obvious that I was sick. So after the summer though, just kind of took a lot of time to regroup, come to terms with my new life, and just understand that I would have to make a lot of changes. And writing was something that I picked up at that time. And I've always loved writing, but I felt like I really needed to give myself an opportunity to explore some therapeutic realms because I didn't know anyone with lupus. It wasn't something that was ever talked about. I had no one to relate to, so I was just trying to figure out the best way to cope. So I started writing. And then, over time, my medications came down, and, it seemed like everything was kind of finally coming back to normal, and I was starting to get back to work part-time, which I wasn't mad about, and get back to the yoga studio, get my practice on. It was baby steps, but it was an opportunity to kind of hit the restart button. A lot of people tend to think that their lupus diagnosis is a doom and gloom, but I tend to think that it wasn't the end of my world, but rather a new beginning, because I was able to hit the reset button and prioritize my health, low stress, prioritize rest. And I'm not someone who ever prioritizes my needs. I prioritize everyone else's. I never say no, but rest assured, I will tell you no now. And if I don't feel up to it, it's not happening, and I don't feel bad about it. And of course, my family and closest friends all understand. Nobody ever pushes me because they've seen me through the years with this disease. So I'm always so grateful for the supportive people in my life and the resources that are available to me. I know that good medical care isn't always easy to come by for certain people, and I'm just grateful that I have all of the resources that I need basically right at my fingertips. So I am very blessed. Also very blessed for the community. I've met so many amazing lupus warriors, and we all share stories and we all support each other. And I just think that it's the most beautiful thing, and just a really strong sense of community. I never feel alone in this struggle, and obviously I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not afraid to share my stories. So you guys are definitely going to hear more over time. But this is just like the low level version of just what is lupus, the symptoms I experienced. And mind you, lupus symptoms are different for everyone, and they affect everyone differently. For me, my lupus is kidney lupus. I have lupus nephritis, which I probably should have started with. And it obviously affects your kidneys. And for me, as most of you learned recently, also affects your heart. So it is something that can also affect the brain, the lungs, the skin, can affect any and everything. So lupus knows no bounds. But for me, I feel like I've handled it with grace, and I'm still able to live and thrive and do the things. So I think I'll wrap it up for now. But yeah, there's going to be more of this. I just feel so compelled to share more about it. You guys know I'm a yogi and I do my yoga thing, but there's so much more behind the lupus and my journey besides yoga and pretty back bends. So I'm finally here to do the things and spread the word. So now you guys know a little bit more about me and my diagnosis, the things that I think contributed to it, and how I've been, how it was after the diagnosis, what it took, time, rest, all the things that I'm doing now. Well, not all the things, but some of the things. So yeah, I hope you can take something from this. no matter what it is. But I'm just grateful if you're here listening, watching, because there's going to be more. Until next time. And always remember, I consider myself to be fierce in flair.